Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Good to see you all. Well, I am happy today to introduce our guest speaker, Chimyo Atkinson, who is joining us by Zoom. Chimyo was ordained in 2007 and received Dharma transmission in 2015. She received her monastic training at Great Tree Zen Women's Temple in North Carolina. And she's completed 2 international training periods, or Angos, in Japan, completed additional training periods in Nagoya, Japan, and Ryumonji Monastery in Iowa. And she's been on the board of directors of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association since 2017. And she was ordained by Teijo Munnich, who some of you know. She was one of Katagiri's students. So Chimyo is in our lineage and very close in our lineage, Dharma cousin, I would say. And I'd like to note that Chimyo has spoken to us before, and she has visited our temple in person. But we have a new Zendo now, and I don't remember if the last time you spoke, I think you were in the new Zendo. No, you were in the old Zendo the last time. Huh.
She's on mute.
Okay, we'll wait a minute till we get some audio there.
Sorry, I wasn't there in person to see it, but I was there some years ago when they had the old Zendo, but not when I spoke last. I wasn't there in person.
I see. Well, welcome back, Chimyo, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. Okay. Well, thank you all. It's great to see you all. For the past, I guess, season or so, I've been talking about Keizan Zenji. If some of you are not aware, in May of this year, in a couple of months, they're going to have a big celebration at Zenji in Los Angeles, the Soto Zen Mission out there. And the main part of that celebration is the 100th year anniversary of Zen in America. And some of you may have heard about that coming up. But also a part of that celebration is a commemoration of the 700th anniversary, what they call the anniversary, of Keizan Zenji. We don't talk about Keizan very much. I don't know why. As some of you may also know, there are 2 main temples in Japan for Soto Zen, the Daihanzon. They're the big training temples in Japan. Eiheiji, of course, was founded by Dogen, and in Japan, they call Dogen the father of Soto Zen. So Jiji, the other main temple, was founded by Keizan, and Keizan is referred to as the mother of Soto Zen. Keizan was not a contemporary of Dogen. He was 4 generations. Well, there's 3, so I guess he is the 4th after Dogen. He didn't meet Dogen. Dogen died in, what year did he die in? In 1253, and Keizan was born in 1268. So he just missed him. So they never met. They were never together in the same room. However, as Dogen's legacy, Keizan encountered, trained with, was transmitted by peers of Dogen. And what do I want to say about that? Well, let's go on. Keizan was born, and I'm going to do a very, very short sort of biography, run through of his biography. Keizan was born in Echizen, which is the area in which Dogen and his peers and his disciples worked in. Echizen is in Fukui, and he was born there. They don't say a whole lot about his father, but they do say a whole lot about the women in his life, including his mother and his grandmother. His grandmother was a disciple, a lay disciple of Dogen. She was a follower of Dogen. So from the very beginning, before the beginning of his life, Keizan was connected to Dogen Zenji. His mother was a devotee of Kannon, and sometime after his birth, she ordained in her lineage, and her name was Ainsa. Let me say it right. His mother was Ekan Daishi. I have trouble with Japanese names, so forgive me, especially if you're Japanese. Forgive me. And she was the Ekan Daishi was the abbess of Jojuji Temple, which is in another lineage, but still connected. So he had a grandmother who was a follower of Dogen, and he had a mother who was devoted to a Zen practice. So where else was he going to go? At the age of 8, he was taken to Eiheiji and given into the care of Gikai, a disciple of Dogen's. At the time that he was committed to the monastery, Teijo, who we know as Dogen's direct heir, was the abbot of Eiheiji. So there, there he was, at 8 years old, already Dogen's one of Dogen's people, already training. He was ordained at the age of 13 by Teijo, and later, after Teijo passed and Gikai became the head of Eiheiji, he was transmitted by Gikai. Along the way, in his late teens, he went on pilgrimage. And during that pilgrimage, he encountered a lot of the quote unquote Zen masters of his time, one of which included Jakuin at Hokkyoji, or what would become Hokkyoji in Japan, in Fukui, who was the monk who traveled to Japan following Dogen from China. He was the Chinese disciple of Dogen. And he also encountered Rinzai masters, masters from the Tendai school, masters from the I'm having trouble remembering today. Maybe that's well from another school that would be very important. I'll remember it in a minute. For some reason, I can't hold it. But he did pilgrimage, and at the end of his pilgrimage, he returned to Eichi, and at that point, he was transmitted. And that began his sort of career that we would know him most for, with writing the transmission of light. The Denko Roku was started when he was about 30 years old. He also wrote Zazen Yojinki, which we know, and a couple of other things. His writing career is not as prolific as Dogen's. I don't think anybody is as prolific as Dogen. There are only a few of his writings that are even translated into English. He also created a shingi. There are two shingis for the shingi is the regulations for monasteries. There are two shingis, Dogen's shingi and Keizan shingi. I mentioned earlier the two Daihanzan, the two main temples of in Japan. So Jiji, as I said, was founded by Keizan. In the early days of his leadership, he created two monasteries. The first one was Yokoji, which is also it's in Ishikawa province near the Noto Peninsula. I had the privilege of doing Ango, or practice period, there way back in 2011. And what really started this journey for me in looking into Keizan were some notes that I found from that Ango so long ago, where I really learned about Keizan after so much practice and so much Dogen. And I learned how revered he is in Japan, maybe not to the same status as Dogen, but he is very much an important figure. In Japan, when you go to a Soto Zen monastery, there's the altar, and on one side of the altar, on the right side of the altar, is the picture of Dogen. On the left is Keizan. So they are very much part of the development to get in different ways of Zen, and particularly Soto Zen in Japan. He created Yokoji, and I'll get back to Yokoji. And then he also had a friend in another Shingon, I'm trying to remember it, in the Shingon tradition, who had a temple in near Yokoji, in the same area, Ishikawa, Wajima. And that was the first Sojiji. And right now it's called Sojiji Soen, Sojiji Father. and the big monastery in Yokohama is an offshoot of that, but has become the main monastery. But it began as a Shingon temple. And for whatever reason, that Shingon abbot, when he passed it on to Keizan. The other important point about Keizan, and I'm cherry picking here for time, is that he also created spaces for women. I began with talking about his grandmother and his mother. The women practitioners in his life were very important. And he, for his time, was very progressive in providing space for women to practice. We know that Dogen, at least in his writings, was supportive of women's practice and believed that women's practice was important. Keizan went that a little bit further. At Yokoji, his first monastery, it's said that women were allowed to practice were allowed to participate in morning zazen and in ceremonies, although they lived and worked separately from the men. Separately from the men meant that there was within the grounds of Yokoji a hermitage for women called Enzuin. And while I was at Yokoji, we saw the space that hermitage took up. It was very small. The building is no longer there. There's nothing there in terms of the building, but the little stupas of some of the women who practiced there remain. And it was an interesting experience to sweep in that little memorial spot. So he provided space for women to practice. He also built other monasteries or hermitages for women. And he also supported his mother, who was still who became the abbot of Jojuji later on in her life. And so all that was influencing him, and he was supporting them as they supported him, because the person who gave him or who provided the land for Yokoji, his first monastery, was a woman and her husband, rich lady. And later on, she became the abbot of Enzuin, and her name was Sonin. We speak her name when we speak the women ancestors. He also transmitted a woman, one of the first women transmitted in Soto Zen. So, well, Dogen put a pen to it. He actually did it. And we don't know what Dogen did. And we know that he had some female followers, but not much is said. I haven't had a chance to really dig into that as to whether he actually practiced with women in his monastery or transmitted or ordained anyone. But we know Keizan did. And that's very important, where I want to go today. But just to give a little bit more as far as Keizan's life. Keizan had a lot of monasteries. That's kind of the point. He headed a lot of places, a lot of practice places. But he was never the abbot of Eiheiji. He was not a direct heir of Dogen in that way. There's a lot of politics that goes on between what happened with Sojiji, Eiheiji, with the third ancestor from Dogen, the third transference of the abbacy. And I won't get into that. You can read history books on that. As always, when we kind of glom on to the great man, and then when he's gone, everybody starts fighting and picking who's next, who's worthy, that sort of thing. And that's how we are in this world. Keizan was around at that time. He was around during that turbulence that of transference. And I don't know, we can only, kind of speculate on what his role is within all that. But what I read and what he writes, what he's left us, doesn't really reflect that turmoil. He seems a little separate from it, even though later on, with the politics between Eichi and Sojiji's, it will become more politics, whatever it is. I think the reason why Keizan is thought of as the mother of Soto Zen is because while Dogen may have established something, and it's not quite sure, what kind of organization Dogen had. He had to have some. We read his Shingi, and he's not very specific about a lot of things. He doesn't talk a lot about ceremonies or anything like that. We know there's a schedule because he's talking about following the schedule. He's talking about elements of the schedule. But mainly what he talks about is the relationship of the practitioner, of the monk, to the temple, how we treat each other, how we vow to take care of the temple and the community that is there. That's what the Tenzo Kyokun is all about. Notes in the study hall. So we know that there's a schedule, but it's not specific about the day-to-day or the week-to-week sort of activities that went on in Eichi. In Keizan's Shingi, a couple of generations later, he's more specific. My understanding is that most of the ceremony that we have these days in our Soto temples, and some people have more than others, comes from Keizan. When we do our memorials for Bodhidharma and those kinds of things that happen, monthly, yearly. When we do our ceremonies around funerals, rites, and things like that, comes from Keizan. And some of the structure that is more specific in terms of what monks do day to day comes from Keizan. However you feel about that, however you feel about ceremony or not, it's a part of our Soto Zen culture right now. My other understanding is that much of what Keizan brought to Soto Zen had to do with including people like the women, like the lay people. Prior to, in the Middle Ages, well, this is kind of the Middle Ages, I guess it is, Zen was a very exclusive, elitist sort of practice. It was mainly for the upper class, the nobility, the samurai, whether it was Menzai or any other brand of Buddhism at the time, Tendai. Dogen came out of Tendai, which was really elitist. But remember, Keizan's mom was a follower of Kanon. Kanon Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva vow to save all sentient beings. I think he took that seriously. So when the women came to practice, he put his money where his mouth is, and he built a place for them to practice, and he built a space for them to practice. And he recognized their achievements, quote unquote achievements, if you want to call it that. I don't know what else to call it, in their practice and in their Zen, and supported them. He created ceremonies and schedules so that the townspeople could be a part of what was going on up on the mountain, because you can't save all sentient beings if they can't even come in the door. You know? He made a space for them. I remember at Yokoji and at other places where I practiced in Japan, even though we were in Ango, there were parts of the schedule where lay people came in. I think in particular of the New Year's celebration, where we hadn't seen anybody for like months. 3 months is a long time. It seems like forever. We hadn't seen anybody in weeks. And suddenly there's this little crowd of people there to help us ring the bell. And that was at Shogoji, not Yokoji. One of the things that we were told when we were ringing, there's a big bell outside of the temple called we called it the Bansho. It's in a little hut. And there's a giant bell, and you hit it with the trunk of a palm tree is the ringer, and you're ringing it. And one of the things that we were told to be we're aware of, there's a verse that you say, which I can't really remember right now because I haven't said it in such a long time. And for it's basically the gist of it is for the benefit of all beings, for the health of all beings, for the salvation of all beings. You hit that bell and it rings out across the land. And the people in the valley can hear it. It's part of their lives to hear the bells from the monastery ringing. Even to the point, there was one point where we were at a particular temple and we were told to chant really loud. And if you go to Sojiji, not Sojiji Soen, but Sojiji in Yokohama, the modern Sojiji, and you hear those monks chanting, they chant it really loud. It's meant to be heard, not just in the Hato, in the Buddha hall, but beyond. That's a kind of symbolic kind of reaching out. Don't want to go on too long about that, but really the importance of reaching out, of being inclusive, as Keizan was, as we assume Dogen wasn't, because I'm not quite sure about that. We think of Dogen as being, very strict and tough, very, straightforward shikantaza. Shikantaza is a part of Keizan too. And I've been trying to find out about this, but nobody seems to really say it. But the Zazenkai that includes lay people that appears, monthly or weekly, depending on where you are, is a part of that. Allowing other people that are not able to become monks, whose karma does not place them in that position, to still practice and still encounter the Dharma. So I think that's why, it's Keizan is also credited with the survival of Soto Zen throughout, and the thriving of Soto Zen after Dogen, because of his including and creating these spaces. I don't want to weigh Dogen and Keizan against each other. I think they both brought a great deal to us. They passed down a great deal to us that is very important. We might not know Dogen's name, possibly, if it weren't for Keizan and the programs and the monasteries and the temples that he helped to grow. He's also credited with institutionalization, which for some reason in the Soto Zen community in America is like a bad word, like a curse. And my take on it is that a friend of mine said, once you're selling t-shirts, once you get the t-shirt, there's the institution. So we need to be careful what we're talking about. But structure and continuity, they are what it is. They are what they are. Institution is what they are. But the spirit of it is what gets lost sometimes when the institution becomes, too big. That's not the fault of, structure. That's the fault of the egos that run it. And that's why we have to be careful. But whatever you think of that, wherever you are on that, and those ideas or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Keizan is important to us because, like Dogen, he's the reason we're here. Teijo, and all the names that we chant when we do the 57 Buddha names of Buddha in the morning. We chant those names, and now including the women's names. You need to know who those people are. We need to know what they contributed. And there's so little information about them available because Dogen, kind of overshadows everything. When you chant that 57 names of Buddha, we're told that, in the training they say, if you have people from different lineages, because there's so many lineages, there's thousands at this time, with different lineages, you stop at Keizan's name because everything comes out of Keizan. And out of respect, because you can't chant all the lineages in the room, so they stop at Keizan. Keizan Jokin Dayosh. We stop and chant his name 3 times. And we need to know who that person is or was and what effect their practice and legacy has, how it's come to us, how we're using it. For Keizan, for me, and like I said, I'm no scholar of Keizan. I don't know everything about Keizan. I just read some books and some articles. But what it's calling up to me is to remember, as important as the basic practice is, and it is the important part. Shikantaza is important. Shikantaza comes out of Shakyamuni's teaching, just like everything else does. And that teaching, it was the first inclusion. It was more inclusive than anything probably that came out of it. Because when Shakyamuni walked and encountered people who were searching for the Dharma, all he said was, "Come." And he didn't ask for your resume. And it didn't matter whether you were a prince or a pariah, whether you were the highest of the high or the lowest of the low, old or young. When he said, "Come," that was an open hand to everyone. And I think Keizan took that to heart when some of his predecessors and some of his peers were still juggling who's worthy or not. So that's what I get from Keizan. And that's why I think it's important, nobody's ever going to overshadow Dogen. You got to know Dogen. He just, whatever. That's who that is. But there's also Keizan. There's also a whole lot of the ancestors that we should at least be curious about. So if you're in Los Angeles in May, around Japantown, around Zenji, I guarantee you they will have a lot more information than I do about Keizan on that day. You might stop in for the celebration and just recognize, one of the mother of our practice today. And just take forth that sort of idea, how do we include everyone? How does, and not everyone is going to be a monk or a nun. Not everyone is going to be a super Zen person, whatever that is. I don't know, still trying to figure that out. But the vow is to share the Dharma with whoever asks and present the Dharma so that it can be seen by everyone, and to meet everyone where they are, meet the questioner where they are, same as the Buddha did. So, because I don't want to keep talking because I can go on and blab all day, I'm going to stop here, and hopefully if you all have some questions, I can try to answer. If you have some comments, if you know something about Keizan Zenji or that time period that you'd like to share, or if you'd like to even ask about anything that we haven't talked about yet, please feel free. And thank you very much for listening.
Chimyo, I think, thank you very much. I think for questions, I won't be able to see all the people on the screen, so you can call on anyone who's on the screen. You all can
Okay.
raise hands, and I'll look back for people in the room because I can see hands in here better. So. I have a question. I'll start. I'm wondering if you'd be could think of some contemporary examples of people who you think are carrying the spirit of Keizan forward, of really opening or being more inclusive, or opening the Dharma to people who've been excluded.
I don't know that I can just name anyone in particular. Um, I haven't had a lot of experience, direct experience, simply because of COVID, of meeting people in person or being able to practice at different temples. Though I have had a little bit more experience lately. I think of places like uh, East Bay Zen Center, where um, their practice is a little different than what I, have grown up with Teijo. Um, but they seem very open, very welcoming to different people. Their basis is still shikantaza and sitting, but there's a sort of not so much emphasis on this kind of stuff, you know, and that's just a-okay, because not everybody has to be a monk or a nun, and nobody has to, not everybody has to, do practice in a certain way. But to be able to give people, a little bit of an experience um, in their day to day that's accessible to them is great. Um, I don't know. I think for the most part, you know, uh, it's it's difficult for us. We put a value on everything. Got to pay for everything. You get what you pay for, that kind of thing. And because of the way Zen grew up in America in this very, consumerist sort of culture, um, that gets in the way a bit, not just financially for people who want to come and practice. And I think at this time, most Zen centers have some kind of way of waiving fee or a sliding scale or something so that people can participate in sesshin and that kind of thing, which is great. But we come from that sort of culture. Mm, I think that I think that through these last few years, especially, a heightened awareness um, of how mm, I can't find my words, but how the room looks. When you go into a room and there's only a certain kind of people there. Whether it's based on financial situation, economic situation, or whether it's all these professional people and or whether it's race or you know ethnicity. We're becoming more aware, and of course that takes time. Okay, shouldn't take too much time, but we need to be aware of that. you know and I think we are becoming more aware of it through the work of the SCBA and other and the temples themselves, just addressing that situation. So I don't know that I can pick out anybody by name. Outside of the Zen world, if you look at the Thich Nhat Hanh folks, they're very diverse, very open um, in terms of their groups and in terms of who's there. in all sort of, I hate to say positions, but all sort of capacities, whether they're monastics or just lay people or lay and entrusted people. It's very varied. But we just need to be aware. We just need to understand, that the vow is not to sit there and, be the cool Zen person or be the, or seek enlightenment for ourselves, because just like any kind of freedom, enlightenment, liberation, whatever, you don't have it if everybody doesn't have it. If nobody else has it, you don't have it either. That way. And think of it in those terms. And I think Keizan, looking at him from this far distance of time, for me, brings that up and reminds me that I can't exclude people just because they don't have time to read, a big old thick Shobogenzo book. They have children, they have, places to go, work to do. They don't have a whole lot of money to go buy books and be scholars or whatever it is we, value so much. So I'm sorry, I don't think I answered your question, did I? I'm sorry. But
I think you did. Thank you.
now other people may know of places that, or teachers that are doing, those sorts of things or are manifesting that sort of spirit of openness.
Cool.
Yeah. Hi. One question I have is often when studying some of the teachers throughout the ages, we end up finding a lot of good things that they contributed, and it's very inspiring from that point. And then we also end up reading things that we don't like from a modern view and contributed stuff, or they have their cultural biases and opinions at the time. And it's hard for me to either see them as all good or all bad, or like feel aversion towards them when we read some of the things that we didn't like. And even in our own lineage with Katagiri, we sent this room because of him practice, but he also got in some trouble. So I guess, I don't know anything about Keizan other than what you just taught. So my question is kind of like, how do you hold the teachers who contributed to the lineage, and also hold at the same time some of the things that were not conducive to well-being?
That's an interesting question. And I think that's something we need to learn to do for teachers of the past and teachers of the present. We tend to forget, I always kind of call it the Yoda syndrome. These people are people, they were human beings, and we attach this little tag to them, Zen master, and Zen master meaning perfect, and Zen master meaning enlightened, and Zen master meaning always enlightened, Zen master meaning that they can do no wrong and everything they say must be, canon, must be true. We forget that we have our own brains, and regardless of whether it's Dogen or Nagarjuna or Keizan, we have to use our own brains, and we have to remember that our practice and our understanding and our actions and our holding of the Dharma is our responsibility. There's a lot of, in particular, when you go back and read the ancestors, a lot of sexism in there. Unfortunately, I wasn't there to question. I'm questioning from a distance of time, but that questioning is still important. It's still what forms me. There's great wisdom in the past, and there are great mistakes, just like we are now. I don't think we're meant to take the ancestors. We're meant to venerate them and revere them and to listen, but listen with a discerning ear, with an honest ear. Maybe not discerning, more honest ear at what you hear. And place it, the thing is, we're always, the main thing of this practice is you're walking the eightfold path in the present. And to determine, to make the choice as to what is your right speech in this moment, and what is the right action in this moment, the right thought in this moment, right understanding with whatever information is right in front of you in this moment, whether it comes from Bodhidharma or the Zen guy down the street. Hold it, and hold it in honesty. And, your understanding of what is, they're just trying to help us, they're just trying to give us, all they've left us is their experience and their understanding from their perspective in their time, space, their present, and it's help, the friends on the path of the Buddha, the friends on the path. That's who Dogen is. That's who Keizan is. Any of these ancestors speaking to us through what's left. Also, be careful, because we're also translating from not only a past that had a different set of conditions, including values and stuff and all those kinds of things. We're also seeing it through translation. And unless, the translator is a machine, all translators have a little bit of an agenda. It's almost impossible to not have a little bit of a message that they want to get through, what they see in that, in what they're translating, what they hear. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying, but we have to, keep that in mind. So the responsibility always comes down to us. So take those stories and those words of the ancestors with a little salt. But remember, you got your own salt, but you got to be honest as to what you actually see before you, because Dogen, as wonderful and brilliant as he was, cannot give me the Dharma. He can show me what he saw. He can share with me his heart, even from 800 years ago. But I have to see with this present heart right now. So take it with a grain of salt and a little love, and be honest with yourself as to what you see. That's how, like, I mean, that's kind of what I've come, my, conclusion has come with all the stuff that I've read and, stuff. I've read so much stuff, I've forgotten most of it at this point. But it always comes down to my responsibility as to how I hold the Dharma and accept that help, but also be real. So I don't think I answered that question either, but thank you for answering it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chimyo. This is really wonderful having you here. We really appreciate the opportunity to hear your voice and your Dharma. And I think we're going to move, if it's okay, to announcements. Do you want to say anything in closing?
Only to thank you all for inviting me, and it's wonderful to you helped me fulfill my vow in sharing the Dharma, and so I'm always glad to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I read the announcements, I'll pass around the